I'm here with Larry Jones. He's the Vice President of the Pennsylvania Coalition of Public Charter Schools. Larry, how many charter schools have been affected by COVID-19 here in Pennsylvania?
Ooh, all of the charter schools, all of our charter schools that are serving 143,000 students have been impacted in some way or another.
And what do those impacts look like?
Well, as you can imagine, charter schools are different across the Commonwealth. We have brick and mortar charters, cyber charters, urban, rural. But I think if we start with the brick and mortar charter schools, I think that's where you're going to see the biggest shift. Those schools have had to pivot from offering a face-to-face brick and mortar education to shifting to an almost entirely virtual method of educating students. Cyber charter schools, of course, were already doing that, but there were still some changes that they had to make, and I think that COVID-19 has created a lot of anxiety and other things that educators are going to have to deal with.
And how did the closing of schools overall in Pennsylvania, how did that impact not only the students, but also the faculty and staff who are helping to teach these students?
Well, my day job, so to speak, is I am the CEO of the Richard Allen Preparatory Charter School here in Southwest Philadelphia. And we're a small school, so I had the opportunity to be kind of connected with a lot of our teachers and students. And as you mentioned, the students had some anxiety, some trauma, and uncertainty. But for staff members, that was there as well, probably in a couple of ways. First of all, staff members were concerned with anyone who may have had to stop into the building, or initially we had staff that did have to come in to get packets ready, to distribute computers. So they had the same fears and anxieties that anyone would. Am I going to get sick? Is my family going to be infected by me bringing something home? And then as we really got into this, we had a number of teachers who expressed that they missed their students and they weren't sure that they were doing everything that they could, because this was not how they were trained to deliver instruction. One teacher in particular had a difficult time and requested that, asked if she could come in by herself just to be in her classroom to conduct lessons. So I think that those are the unseen frontline heroes of COVID-19, the people who were working with students remotely and who were dealing with the frustrations that children were feeling and dealing with their own frustrations.
Now, what are charter schools as well as the Coalition of Public Charter Schools doing to help support students and teachers as they're doing online classes and as Pennsylvania begins to reopen, and that meaning schools potentially reopening?
Okay, that's a great question. So what we've seen, number one, from a more global perspective, is that the Pennsylvania Coalition of Public Charter Schools has been working with the Pennsylvania Department of Education, has been sending out regular guidance to our schools, so that anytime Pennsylvania Department of Education sends out guidance, the coalition is sending it out to make sure that member schools are getting it. We've been speaking with and communicating with the Department of Education and Secretary Rivera. We've set up meetings with Secretary Rivera where he has met with small groups of charter school operators, and we're trying to keep that pipeline of information open, because the best thing that we can do to support our parents is to support our schools and get them information. From a more localized point of view, different schools have done different things. I've heard a number of schools who have done really fun things via Zoom to make children feel more at home and more like regular school. One of the things that our school did is that we realized that we had employees who, based on their job description, are normally working with students every day. And because they're no longer doing that in a face-to-face, they had time. And so we had every staff member assigned as a virtual advisor, so that we wanted to make sure that children were being contacted at least by phone, some type of communication on a weekly basis at the very least. And that was in addition to anything that their teachers were doing. So I think schools are reaching out. And one of the things as we move forward that we often find is usually last in a plan or last in a conversation, we're pushing to make at the top. And that is addressing students' social, emotional, and trauma needs, because our kids have so many things that they're facing. So if you only just turn on the news and look at the fact that Are we in a spike, or is COVID getting better? Is COVID something that can hurt students, or can it not? Can your parents get sick and die? Can you bring it home? And this is a lot of information that adults are having a difficult time with. So we want to make sure our children are addressed as well.
Now, as charter schools and schools in general are beginning to think about reopening, what are those preparations that go into preparing to reopen? And I know brick and mortar versus cyber charter schools, they might have a different preparation process.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we have to look at is how we're going to deliver our instruction and our programming. And that's where guidance from the department and guidance from medical entities is really important. We need to know exactly what it is that we've been offered in terms of parameters. I'm an educator. That's what I'm trained to be. I'm not a physician. I wouldn't feel very comfortable leaving medical decisions up to me. At the same time, we know that we have to move forward. So some of the things that we're looking at are, how are we preparing our buildings? That means that we have to have social distancing. Where are we bringing students into the buildings? How are we going to screen students? How are we going to isolate students if students are exhibiting any types of symptoms? Are we going to make sure, and how are we making sure that our technology is in place? Because most schools that you hear, brick and mortar schools, talking about education are going to look at moving forward in one of three possible ways. The first way is that we just have 100% of our students and staff come back into school as if everything is normal with a few slight accommodations. I don't think that most schools are going to be able to do that. So then the next option becomes some type of a hybrid approach. Do we have school children coming in on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then the other students come in on Tuesday, Thursday, and switch? And then the days that students are off, would they be doing virtual at home? And then the third way would be a 100% virtual. So what we're doing as a school, and what many schools are doing, and I've also heard districts are doing, is we're putting a plan in place for every single one of those, with the understanding that in 2020 and 21, it's likely that we may be delivering education in every one of those models.
Now, the Department of Education has recently issued guidance on reopening schools. Can you talk a little bit about what their guidance says and what that reopening process would look like?
So a big part of the guidance is mandating that schools do actually have a plan. And then to get to that plan, schools are required to have a pandemic team with a pandemic coordinator. And there are specific components of the plan. So for example, I'm going to hold to my word and make this first. One of the things is to make sure of the social and emotional well-being of our students and families and teachers. Another part of the plan is to actually look at our physical space and identify how are we going to make the spaces clean. That incorporates ventilation systems, that incorporates disinfecting buildings, daily disinfecting and cleaning of buildings, having professional development and training for not only our maintenance and cleaning staff, but also for teachers and others so that they're aware of how to keep our building clean and healthy. There's also going to be training for students and looking at how we do social distancing, how we set schools up for social distancing, mandating that students wash their hands, do hand sanitizer, how we're going to implement and utilize personal protection equipment. That means masks, that could mean gloves, that could mean any number of different things. And then we get into our educational program. So as you notice, we've discussed a lot of different things before we've even started to talk about what education looks like. And within our education program, as I said, we have three different models. So how are we going to get computers to students? How are we going to set up to make sure that we're not just doing review? We can't do large segments of review and skill building. We've got to be educating students and getting into new content and working with students as if this is school is normal. And then the other pieces that we have to look at are, how are we engaging with families, with understanding that we have families that no matter how good our plans are, what if a parent says, I just don't feel comfortable and I don't want to bring my child in? What if a parent doesn't have health, what if a parent doesn't have childcare? And so these are the questions that we and other schools are looking at.
Now, as we're recording this on Wednesday, earlier today, you were testifying in a House hearing about reopening schools. Can you talk about that experience and what the representatives asked you about?
Okay. So from the experience, we had superintendents represented. We had individuals who were representing diocesan schools, individuals representing other private schools, religious schools. And from a school perspective, initially when you hear testimony, everyone's got, has to advocate for their little different position, right? But then you get down to the meat of things, and that is that we all have similar questions and similar concerns. And that is, how are we going to get students into buildings? How are we going to make sure that our staff members are safe? And how are we going to do the mandates that are being put upon us? And a couple of things came up as very common themes. Number one is ensuring that we all have a baseline of guidance and understanding. One of the discussions that took place between members of the committee and also the panelists is the fact that we are a local control state. And there's always that push in regards to being a local control state. From a school point of view, I think there was unanimity to the fact that we do appreciate that flexibility. However, we need some very baseline guidance. And that guidance has to set up the parameters within which we can work. Things like, if we're doing virtual education, how do we track attendance and engagement? Are we going to be waived if we are doing half schedules for students from the instructional hours and instructional day mandates that we have? What do we do with students whose parents refuse to send them to school? These are the things that we need to know, and these things need to be very concrete so that our creativity with making sure that we can do school in not just the way it used to be, because I don't necessarily know that school's ever going to be the way it used to be, but we can at least endeavor to make sure that school is rigorous and enjoyable and effective for the students we serve.
Larry Jones, thank you so much for your time.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
PCN Tours presents From the Factory. Stay home and go on tour with a manufacturer who is helping their community through this trying time. Hear directly from employees on the front lines making masks, hand sanitizer, and other products needed to combat COVID-19. From changing operations to creating new products, PCN is dedicated to telling the story of how companies in your backyard are adapting. Stream free on the PCN Select app and PCNTV.com.
I'm here with Senator Lindsey Williams. She's a Democrat representing part of Allegheny County. Senator, can you tell us a little bit about the situation with COVID-19 in your district?
So it's been rough. A lot of people are struggling. A lot of people have gotten sick. A lot of people are at work working under tough conditions. A lot of our healthcare workers and first responders are dealing with things they never thought they'd have to deal with. I know I spoke to a firefighter who said, we're used to putting ourselves in danger. We're not used to going home and exposing our families to that danger. And then you have so many small businesses that are struggling to stay afloat, to take care of their employees, people who are unemployed because of COVID. So there was a lot of stress happening in my district and really across the Commonwealth.
And as Pennsylvania has slowly been reopening, what has the reopening process been like in your district and across the state?
It's been challenging. It's, people are still trying to understand what the red, yellow, green means, understand that green still has some restrictions and why those restrictions are important to continue decreasing the cases here in Pennsylvania. And so people are just trying to, I found that most people they want to follow the rules. They want to be safe for themselves and their neighbors, and they're, just trying to see what is safe, what can I do? And that is been an education piece that myself and my office have been trying to just constantly push out information of what these stages mean, what they can do to protect themselves, but also get back to work and that sort of thing.
What have been the biggest concerns that you've heard from your constituents, and how have you and your office been working to address those?
Unemployment has been a huge thing for the last couple weeks. I mean, just having a historic high number of people go on unemployment on a system that is 40 years old, it was a struggle. There were a couple weeks there where it was really bad. It has gotten better. Then there are still people who are struggling, but we're working through them. And, you know, as we get through them, it's getting easier to help those people. But if you're one of those people that are still waiting for your check, that's really hard. I mean, my mom was one of those. She was, you know, waiting for her first check for, I think it was 2 months, or so it was like a long time because there was a mix up with her social security number. So if that's you and that's your family, it's hard. But the staff at the labor and industry have been working maybe not quite around the clock, but pretty close to get people the benefits that they need.
Now, last week, the legislature passed House Resolution 836. Can you tell us a little bit about what that resolution is and what it would do were it to take effect?
So it is a resolution that is purported to end the emergency declaration. The supporters of the House resolution have said that it will end the business closures, which that's not what it actually does. In ending the governor's emergency declaration, what it does is actually take away benefits that people have been seeing. It limits the ability of our National Guard to go and provide assistance to our nursing homes that are struggling with staffing and high cases of coronavirus. It takes away the ability to have telemedicine. It takes away some protections for the unemployment. There are regulations that it ends that are actually helping people survive this crisis. It doesn't actually end the restrictions and the things on the business closure end of the thing. And it also jeopardizes, what I think is really serious is there's no guarantee that it doesn't jeopardize our federal funding that is designed to help everybody dig out of the economic hole that we've put ourselves in.
Now, on the Senate floor, you did argue against this resolution. What was the response from your colleagues, about this resolution itself?
What do you mean by colleagues?
Your fellow senators who are also debating on the floor.
I think unfortunately it was split pretty among party lines, and that's not where we want to be. We want to be working, and our constituents want us to be working together to solve these problems. Instead of having a partisan fight over this, we should be having a discussion about how do we make sure that we're putting more money into our schools to fund to make sure that kids can catch up when they get back in September. What are we doing to make sure that that everybody has access to PPE and testing and contract tracing? There are things that we can do that are bipartisan rather than have this partisan fight that at the end of the day isn't really solving the problem that you're talking about on the floor.
And where is this resolution in the process of being implemented or not being implemented?
So right now we're heading to court to figure that out and to address the constitutionality questions, because it is the belief of our caucus that since that is a resolution that does accomplish legislation or legislative accomplishment, that has to go to the governor for signature. If it doesn't get signature, it is a resolution that needs 2/3 in order to actually overturn the governor's emergency declaration, which that resolution does not have. So we will be going to court to have that constitutional question answered by our court system.
Now, not only has the Senate been working on potentially ending this emergency declaration, but you also led a policy hearing recently about funding for childcare centers. Can you talk a little bit about that and why that was such an important hearing to be had in the Senate?
That's so important because childcare workers, childcare centers are an essential part of our workforce. We can't have our nurses and doctors and firefighters and police officers working if they don't have access to quality, affordable childcare. It is an important part of our economy, and most of our childcare centers are small businesses, and they work on very slim margins. And when you close schools and take away their the children they're taking care of for, they don't have the revenue to stay afloat. And we, honestly, before COVID happened, we were already in a crisis with childcare, and it was already holding back our economy. So this has just made it that much more worse and that much more precarious, that as we reopen, we need these childcare centers to remain solvent and also have what they need so that when our kids go there, they're safe. They have all the PPE, they have the cleaning, they have any training for staff that they might need to make sure that them and the children they take care of are safe.
What have been the struggles that you've heard about in that hearing, and what do these childcare centers need to make sure that they can be fully operational once they're allowed to reopen?
The funding is just a huge piece, because they were already struggling, and that was, in some of these areas where it's the only one, you wonder what happens to families afterwards, and we can't have that happen.
And you also plan to introduce some legislation to help fund these childcare centers. What would your legislation do for these centers?
So my legislation provided $100 million to childcare centers to cover all administrative costs, staffing costs, that sort of thing. $17 million for pre-K and Head Start, because our most vulnerable kids, they're going to need additional assistance to get caught up on anything they missed while we were gone. And $50 million to extend pre-K and Head Start into the summer to mitigate some of those losses as well. Now, we were successful within our allocation of the CARES dollars to get significant resources, but we still have more CARES money available to allocate, and we still have some additional pieces that we're going to be working to make sure that we take care of those child care centers.
Now, finally, the House and Senate still have a few more sessions this month. What will you guys be focusing on legislatively?
We've been having a lot of discussions on police accountability. There are joint law and justice hearings today and judiciary hearings. There's 2 days of hearings to talk about that. There is movement in the House, so we may be coming back to address some of those bills. We may have another discussion on what is happening with the layoffs of the turnpike workers. I'm hoping that we'll have some discussions about transparency and accountability. I have a bill, the False Claims Act, to protect people who blow the whistle on waste, fraud, and abuse. And when you're spending this much money, you should be protecting people to speak up and make sure that every dollar is getting to the small business, the child care center, the worker, wherever it's designed to go. We should make sure that it gets there.
Senator Lindsey Williams, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
The PCN family. Our roots run deep. What grew out of a plan to distribute educational programming has grown into the nation's leading statewide public affairs network. Since 1979, PCN has been supported by cable operators across the state. It is because of this generous support that PCN uses no state or federal tax dollars, reaching more than 10 million of our neighbors. Thank your cable operator. We do.
I am here with Maura Shenker. She is the director of the Small Business Development Center at Temple University. Maura, can you tell us a little bit about the Development Center and what you guys do there?
Sure. Temple Small Business Development Center is set up to help entrepreneurs and small businesses start, grow, prosper, make informed decisions. We're funded by the SBA at the federal level, DCED at the state level, and through the generosity of Temple University and the Fox School of Business. So most of the services we provide, all of the one-on-one consulting, they're at no cost to our clients because they're funded through the grants.
Now, how many clients does the Development Center serve?
Well, we try to build relationships with our clients and serve them over a period of long term. So we can work with a client from pre-venture when they're just getting their idea, work with them on feasibility statement, through opening, through funding, through expansion. So we could work with people for years, even serial entrepreneurs, as they move from one business to another business. But I would say that we probably have, 400 to 600 active clients that we're currently working with at any time.
Now, as COVID-19 hit Pennsylvania, how were these small businesses affected by that?
Most of them were heavily negatively impacted, I would say. We saw, a few businesses that could pivot. into making PPE or opening call centers and contact tracing that actually, ended up maintaining their current level of revenue. But I would say the vast majority of small businesses saw a significant drop in revenue.
And what were the biggest concerns of these small business owners?
The first concern we saw was for their employees. Most small business owners, the first thing they had to do, unfortunately, was think about closing down and laying off or furloughing employees. And so we saw a lot of concern from business owners about their people, which is always good to see. And of course, the PPP program, the payroll protection program, was set up specifically to help business owners keep their employees on the payroll and make sure that they could continue to support their, business family.
Now, Pennsylvania is starting to reopen in the yellow and green phases of Governor Wolf's reopening plan. What does that mean for small businesses across the state?
Well, it's really hard to talk about that as a lump. One, depending on your industry, you may not be able to open at all until we're well into the green. And two, depending on where you are in the state. So Philadelphia, the urban, densely populated areas are opening more slowly. And as they open, we're of course seeing not a huge rush out into public. So some of it is about the government reopening the businesses or allowing the businesses to be reopened, but we really need consumer confidence. We need people to feel comfortable that businesses are taking every precaution to keep them safe, and we need people to feel safe out in, public again. And obviously, restaurants, we're only seeing outdoor dining. And so that's much fewer covers, so fewer people able to sit. And then even as we see indoor dining in other parts of Pennsylvania, it's only at, say, 50% capacity because of social distancing regulations. So if you have a retail store or a restaurant, a brick and mortar operation, you really have to think about how people are spaced in your business, how many people can be in your location at any given time. There's additional costs in cleaning because everything needs to be cleaned much more thoroughly and much more often than, normal, just a single nightly cleaning isn't going to do it anymore. So we're seeing a lot of added expenses, added pressure, feelings of safety, a lack of consumer confidence. It's not just about green phase, yellow phase.
So you mentioned that some industries are not being allowed to reopen at this time. What are some of those industries and what are they doing?
Well, we're seeing, of course, the personal service industries. So here in Montgomery County, where I am, we are seeing, pools being able to open, but not gyms. So we're seeing, the hair salons, the nail salons, spas, personal services, gyms, personal trainers. We've seen a lot of pivots with moving online and selling products. So if you were a salon, we've seen some really imaginative and creative pivots where people are creating YouTube videos or having one-on-one online Zoom meetings, and they send you your color and they walk you through putting on your color application yourself. Or they have their own, custom products, and they're working much more on selling their shampoos and conditioners or, nutrition supplements, things like that.
Now, for those businesses that are reopening, how can they ensure that consumer confidence that you were talking about to make sure that customers feel comfortable and safe in their businesses?
A lot of that is really about communication. It's very important for businesses to communicate internally with their employees. The employees, to feel safe returning to work, need to know what's being done to protect them. And they need to know that, yes, there is, management in place that will stop people from coming in who aren't wearing a mask. So you have two sides. For the consumers, it's really about to get your clients back in, your customers. You really want to let them know what you're doing to keep them safe. So you want to have an online presence, your Facebook page, your website. You want to tweet it out. Whatever you're doing to keep them safe, it should be part of your new marketing strategy. Additional cleaning, the products you're using, new reservation system, what you're doing to limit the number of people in the store. Are you requiring reservations? That's something we're seeing. Some for the outdoor seating, some restaurants are going first come, first serve. Some restaurants are using a reservation system online, because obviously what you don't want is to disappoint your clients the first time they come back out to your place. If it's first come, first serve and there's no tables available, then, here they made an effort, they wanted to support you, and they couldn't. And so you want to really avoid that as a business owner. You really want to focus on the personalized service, customer satisfaction, communication.
Now, as these businesses are reopening, are there any assistance that they can receive from the state or federal government to help them during the reopening process?
Absolutely. So I already mentioned the PPP, and actually just 2 days ago, the EIDL disaster loans reopened. So they had only been opened for agricultural businesses in the last few weeks, and they reopened to everyone. In addition, $225 million of CARES Act funding that had come through to the state is going to be distributed to small businesses in the forms of grants. So there's a brand new program which we expect to open by June 30th. It's going to run through the CDFIs, the Community Development Financial Institutions. It doesn't matter where you are in the state. You're eligible as long as you have fewer than 25 full-time employees and less than $1 million in annual revenue. So this program is really set up for the micro businesses, the smallest of businesses, and part of the money is specifically set aside for historically disadvantaged businesses, people of color, women-owned businesses. So there is actually kind of a priority system. They'll use census tract, lower income businesses, and lower income community businesses will be given priority for these grants.
So you mentioned that this money will be distributed as grants. How will businesses be able to apply for those grants through the CDFIs?
There's going to be a single online portal, so it should be very simple. It doesn't matter where you are in the state or if you have a current relationship with the CDFI, that doesn't matter. The CDFIs, 17 CDFIs formed a coalition. They're working with an online platform so that there'll be a single online application, and then you can either choose a CDFI if you know of one or there's one close to you, or you can just let the CDFI, there'll be like a round robin algorithm, and it will choose the CDFI for you.
And what can these small businesses use that grant money for?
Well, there'll actually be a part of the application where they say what they're going to use the money for. It needs to be a business expense. It's not nearly as restrictive as the PPP. It doesn't have to be payroll. It doesn't have to be just rent or mortgage. It can be used for debt relief. So if people have gotten behind with their vendors, it can be used to pay back bills. It can be used to help with a new marketing strategy or upgrade your website, online e-commerce presence. Really, it can be used for anything that's going to help your business. And we hope that people applying will also come to the SBDC. Temple is one of 16 SBDCs in the state. But every single county in Pennsylvania is served by an SBDC in the PA network. So we hope that businesses will be able to get the money and then work with a consultant at the SBDC to look at their specific situation and how to best use the money for their business.
And when can these small businesses expect to see that money?
Well, we believe that the applications will open by June 30th, and there can be up to 4 rounds of funding. So the idea is that it's not going to be first come, first serve. The application will open for 10 days. People will apply. Then the rubric will be applied for priority, the historically disadvantaged businesses, the needs of the business, the lower income businesses will score higher, and they'll get preference for this round. And then the next round of funding will open. If you didn't receive funding in the first round, you'll automatically be moved into the second round of funding. So there should be a great opportunity for many businesses to apply.
Maura Shenker, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.